After watching prosecutors exploit his family's pain during the Delaware trial and realizing that they were planning to do it again here in California, Hunter decided to enter his plea to protect those he loves from unnecessary hurt and cruel humiliation. This plea prevents that kind of show trial that would have not provided all the facts or served any real point in justice.
That was Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell, yesterday talking about the first son's surprise guilty plea to all 9 federal tax charges brought against him by special counsel David Wise. Now, the decision coming hours after jury selection was supposed to begin. Hunter saying in his own statement last night, quote, "I will not subject my family to more pain, more invasions of privacy, and needless embarrassment. For all I have put them through over the years, I can spare them this, and so I have decided to plead guilty." The judge scheduled sentencing for December 16th. Hunter faces a maximum of 17 years in prison, a fine of up to $1.3 million. Now, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was asked about whether or not the president plans to pardon his son on his way out of office. Watch this.
I can say that it is still very much a no to the questions that I've gotten about if the president's going to pardon his son, but I don't have anything else to add.
Can you comment on whether a commutation would be on or off the table?
That's also no.
Okay, joining me now, former federal prosecutor and constitutional law attorney Andrew Cherkasky. First off, your reaction to the surprise move by Hunter yesterday. Apparently, the prosecution was taken off guard.
Well, we knew that the Hunter Biden tax trial was going to have fireworks. We didn't know they were going to come this early. So we had expected it was going to be weeks and weeks of testimony, much like we saw in the gun case, where not only was Hunter Biden terribly embarrassed by the evidence, but his entire family was. Yeah. So when he walked in yesterday and said that he was changing his plea, it was a surprise. But to the extent that he has any hubris at all, it is no surprise. There was no case there. There was no defense to be had. He had been talking about the idea that his drug and alcohol abuse somehow should have forgiven the offense. And even after he pled guilty, we still saw his attorney making statements outside the courthouse blaming this on the drugs and alcohol. That has nothing to do with whether you filed your taxes on time and, more importantly, whether you reported to the IRS that there are business expenses that were clearly not
because when he came out of treatment, he could have begun the process with the IRS. Believe me, if you owe the money to the IRS, they will work with you to get their money. They have no problem with that. So do you think he goes to jail?
He will go to jail. I think when you calculate both the gun case, which may not get a jail sentence, but that combined with the tax case, he will undoubtedly get a jail sentence of some sort. Now, the timing is very interesting because by pleading guilty now, that puts the sentencing in December. Had he fought this, that could have been past the inauguration. With it in December, that gives Joe Biden the ability not only to pardon him, but once he's sentenced, Joe Biden could commute the sentence. And that's kind of in the sweet spot as a total lame duck. I know he said what he said, and his press secretary has denied that there would be a pardon or otherwise, but there's nothing binding him to that, and he's changed his mind plenty of times before as well.
So you think it's still a possibility? That's interesting.
I think it's a high likelihood.
Well, let's talk. There's a lot of legal issues going on with the former president right now. Let's talk about this. So former President Trump pleading not guilty yesterday to charges from special counsel Jack Smith's new indictment in the January 6th case after the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. The district judge in that case, Tanya Chutkan, also said yesterday she would not hold the trial before the election, but she's allowing for new evidence to be released before November 5th. And Chutkan says that she's, quote, not concerned with the electoral schedule. So she's given a September 26th deadline for prosecutors to lay out how they intend to try the case and gives the Trump team until October 17th to respond. Trump's lawyers argue the case should not be in the spotlight, obviously, in the run-up to the election, Andrew. So what do you think happens here? And what new evidence do you think, if any, that the prosecution may have that could be damaging to President Trump?
I don't think there's much in the way of new evidence. This is a matter that I think the American people have fully heard about. This is all about January 6th. We had the congressional hearings on that. The media has dragged that story, I think, on for 4 years at this point. We all know what happened. We know what Donald Trump said and what he didn't say. We know what others did and didn't do. This is a case that's purely about the law. It's about whether Donald Trump Trump has a certain degree of immunity, and whether the idea that the president who was speaking to a large group of people should be held responsible for some of those folks who became unruly and violated the law themselves. So this all comes back down, I think, to many complicated legal issues that the judge is now going to try to sort through ahead of the election. A lot of that's going to get lost in the details of that will get lost. But the point being, he's going to have some court hearings coming up. All of that subject to appeal. I think that is all pushed way down the road.
But this evidence, if entered, would be open and available to the press.
There is
that's the worry, obviously.
There's more of that evidence that's going to come forward. Again, I don't think anything's going to be new. I think the big concern is whether there's going to be a mini trial to decide on these immunity issues. Almost all the evidence has to be previewed to the judge before she can decide what is within the gambit of permissible and what is actually immune from being used at trial.
That's interesting. So I do want to ask you about this. America First Legal is suing New York State Supreme Court Judge Juan Merchan, who presided, of course, over Trump's New York fraud trial for refusing to turn over his financial disclosures after questions about his daughter's work at a Democratic firm. So under New York law, judges are required to file annual financial disclosures, and they're also required to make them available upon request. So America First Legal sent a letter demanding Merchan's disclosures last week after previously requesting them back in June. He didn't respond, Andrew. What do we expect now?
Well, Judge Merchan has been under the gun to recuse himself from this case from the beginning, not only because of his own affiliations, but that of his daughter as well. This is one more step of legal action that demonstrates that he has serious issues in this case. There are concerns that are raised by him being on this case, and the decision, the verdict ultimately, I think, depended heavily on the fact that Judge Merchan allowed in a lot of evidence, allowed the case to go in a certain way that turned into kind of a circus, a sideshow, when it was just a really basic case all along. So there's lots of issues with him. That is a huge issue on appeal. I don't think there's anything that's going to happen in the short term. But that's Judge Merchan for you.
Yeah, and former President Trump is going to be actually in court with the E. Jean Carroll case as well. So a lot of cases to follow. Andrew, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's always great to have you on set, especially for all these legal issues. Andrew Cherkowski.